I've got 2 lectures today, which everything in it will be useful to the day you retire, because it has to do with medicine and the law. Now, there are very few people in the room who have actually seen as much of this as I have. Since 1976, I've reviewed slightly over 2,100 medical legal cases. I was president of 2 malpractice insurance companies. I've been to court all kinds of times. So pay attention here. And the reason is your chances of running afoul of the system are about once every 4 to 6 years. Now you say, well, that's not so bad. Yeah, it is, because it takes about 4 or 6 years of each one of those cases to be litigated. So you can be tied up all the time. It's not a good thing. Avoid this whenever you can. The medical legal system is the only game in town where the only way you win is not to play. Pay attention. Little background. We've had about 5,000 years of written law. 5,000 is sort of a magic time frame. This is, everything before that in humans is prehistory. Once you write it down, you become history. So for just about the same time as we've been writing, we've written down laws. And it's good to remember that we had a complete set written up in 560 or 1760 BCE in the Code of Hammurabi. Now, Hammurabi, you got to like the guy in some ways. Because if you actually read the code, and by the way, we can read it completely, that language is completely figured out. He said things like, if a contractor's house falls on the people who, he built the house for, they get to stone the contractor to death. They even had one that said if the doctor, the surgeon, cut on somebody and they died, they could cut the surgeon's hands off. Now, I don't know what Hammurabi said about urologists, but think about this. I mean, this is a very, they figured out what was going on. So at least by 1760 BCE, we had a malpractice statute. We don't know what happened, whether anybody ever got tried under it, that sort of thing. But it's not something strange or unusual, and we know about it. By the way, you live and work in a system of English law with an American twist. Now, having lectured at over 100 law schools in Medicolegal Questions, let me just tell you there is an intense interest in this, not only in lawyers, the law community, but in the public. They think that they ought to be protected from bad actions. Most of you can agree with that. It just is, just dying doesn't mean you committed malpractice, does it? See, on that grounds, every one of us commits malpractice every day. Somebody's going to die. There are other questions that have to be answered. By the way, we have written laws and decisions in English law from about 1290. And so we actually have a lot of years, long before this was a country, of malpractice cases. Now, it isn't very common in Europe, certainly not common in England, but this has been going on for a while. You're not going to avoid it. First thing you got to come to grips with is nobody gives a crap about you. Can we agree with that? Yeah, okay? Nobody cares about you so much as that the system functions, that we are able to grind the meat. And when you get sucked into it, it's a process. You live and work in this system and never believe that this process has anything to do with fairness or justice. It has to do with moving the meat, getting things through, and if you get sucked into it, to some extent it's your problem. What the law does, and it's important you understand these two functions of the law. It settles disputes and it puts forward public policy. That's what the law is for. Settles disputes. You notice I didn't say fairly. And it puts forward public policy. And this is a warning. One of the reasons that there are well-publicized cases, doesn't matter what it's in, is so that everybody thinks about it. By the way, you never get a jury of your peers, so don't sit around here thinking you're going to get 5 nurses and 3 techs and 2 docs and all that. It doesn't happen. Why? Because most of the medical people do whatever they can to get out of juries, and most judges don't leave them on juries because they'll influence what goes on. So don't think you're going to get a jury of your peers. It does not happen. All right, let's talk for a minute about criminal and civil. 2 big groups of law. Criminal law has to do with the mens rea, the guilty mind. The criminal law asks this question: what was the intent? Intent is the issue. In civil law, damage is the issue. They never say in a malpractice case, PA so-and-so or nurse practitioner so-and-so intentionally hurt somebody. Because that wouldn't be civil, that would be criminal. Civil law, that has to do with damage. Criminal law has to do with intent. We've got to keep them apart. By the way, you don't have to carry on this discussion much in the United States anymore since O.J., right? He was tried criminally and got off. But civilly, he lost. So the country has seen that go forward, and so we kind of understand the difference between the civil aspects and the criminal aspects of the law. Malpractice is tort law, one against the other. Okay? It's tort law. It's damages done to someone else. And now we got to find out who's going to pay for it. And law varies, by the way. In South Dakota and in Florida, we have 50 states. We have U.S. territories. We have different laws and a different book of case law in every state. I put up South Dakota and Florida for a reason. The least sued place in America is South Dakota. Why? Because they kind of like their doctors and shit. They don't want you moving out of town. The other thing is, those are ranchers and farmers. They see things die all the time. They don't give a damn, okay? They understand it. Now, if you actually leave the body in the hallway with a knife in it and your fingerprints on it, they might be upset. Okay, maybe. Depends if he deserved killing or not, I guess. But, well, that's Texas. That's different. But Florida is the most sued place, particularly if you look at like Dade County, that sort of thing, Wayne County, Michigan. The difference in emergency medicine in getting sued is a factor of between 10 and 12 times the difference. And believe me, they don't know anything more in one group of states than the other. It's the way that culture handles problems. Why is it easy to sue in the United States? Because they'd rather they sue you than shoot you. Last time I checked, guns are still available. Okay, not a problem. And they'd rather people follow the path of suit than shoot. That's why we have easy access to courts, because it is the most predictable way of resolving disputes. You're going to be judged on something called the standard of care. Know that phrase and what it means. Standard of care is that which the reasonable practitioner would do under like or similar circumstances. It doesn't mean you have to make the diagnosis every time. But what would the reasonable person do? That's who is trained in the field. What does the reasonable person do? That is the standard of care. And so that's what you will be judged against in civil law, is the standard of care. See that barcode down there? That's from registered mail. Henry's law is nothing good comes registered mail. I want you to think about that for a second. You know, you might hear from the tax people, you might hear from this or that, but nothing good comes registered mail, and that includes lawsuits. When you get one and it comes in the mail, open it. Don't throw it away. I've actually had physicians, nurses, PAs, NPs who were so frightened by being sued, they tossed them. Well, what happens then? See, if you don't answer a registered complaint within a certain time frame, they find against you. We had a doctor at my own place who shoved it in a drawer and was ashamed to tell us until they sent a notice to the group that $1 million had to be paid because he ignored this. Now, it didn't actually end up that way. We finally got around to solving it. But take this seriously. This is for real. You can't avoid it. Putting it in a drawer doesn't make it go away. I promise you that. So you have to get involved and manage it from moment one. By the way, we often think about the elements of tort, but the term the best care is not what you're held to. Some people may say, well, at the Mayo Clinic, they do this. Right? Does it matter what they do at the Mayo Clinic? No, because that may have nothing to do with what your place is like. 3 things in the world badly overrated, home cooking, home sex, and the Mayo Clinic. And because they do something at Rochester, Minnesota, doesn't mean you have to do it in your place, but you need to be aware of what's going on out there. There are 4 principles of establishing liability. This is what they talk about every single time. Number 1, what's your duty? Were you there? Were you supposed to be working? It's very hard in the emergency department to deny duty. You're there, you're working. People come in. Do you have a duty to see them? Yes, you do. That's the implied duty that everyone understands. The breach, that's where you did it wrong. They're going to claim, well, he should have done this. They should have done that. So breach is what they're going to try and discover. Then the harm. You've got to remember, a lot of people are going to have harm no matter what you do. How many people have run a code and the patient died? God, it has to be every hand in the place, unless you did something different than I did. But basically, I'm your last stop before heaven. And I understand that. So if they judged us by the outcome of every code, we'd be out of here a day. maybe 2, but that'd be about it. So the law recognizes that action. And the last thing is something called the proximate cause. That's the relationship between what you did and what happened. I can't tell you the number of times I've been to court to hear the damnedest crap you ever heard. I had somebody testify, a doctor testify as an expert, who said that only if they'd given another amp of bicarb during the cardiac arrest, this 92-year-old woman would have been saved. Oh my God. You say dumb shit like this? I'll haul you out and beat you. But they do. You can't believe, when you enter the legal realm, you ought to hear the sounds, the opening to the Twilight Zone. Do, right? Because they're going to hear and say things which are absolutely preposterous. Society, by the way, acts to defend itself. That's what law is. Law is the society working to protect itself. We have EMTALA and COBRA, and I've lived through all of that. I was working long before there were EMTALA and COBRA laws because it thinks it needs to go on record and state things. EMTALA, COBRA. This is the society saying, you, hospital, you, doctor, you, PA, NP, you're going to do things a certain way, and now that we've developed case law on this, we know what they mean. If you don't know COBRA at EMTALA, backwards and forwards, you need to. There are just rules here. You have a duty to the patient. You establish the rules. First time, by the way, the federal government got into this business, and they're serious about it. EMTALA is a federal statute. They can come at you, so the feds can come at you, the state can come at you. Complex. Here's just some rules to go along with these things. First one, see everybody. All right, we done now? Whenever a nurse comes up and says, will you see? I'll see anybody. I'll do a rectal on their pet chicken if they want. I don't care. Just stick them in a room and I'll do it. It's not worth carrying on conversation about because you're going to wind up seeing them anyway, so shut up and just do it. You only transfer to a higher level of care. I mean, there are reasons to transfer. But if one of those reasons is, well, your 2 orthopods have decided they're not doing these cases anymore, find out about that before there's a case that happens and fix it. Because you can then become a part of breaking the federal law. Insurance status should never be asked as the first question. Now, there are reasonable places for checking with insurance and arranging transfers, and that helps to not bankrupt the patient. It's important to do. But if what you're doing is asking them first thing through the door, yeah, and who's paying for this? I'll tell you who's going to pay for this, you. Because that's an inappropriate question to begin the process. And on-call physicians have obligations to the hospital as well. Somebody calls up and the ophthalmologist said, well, I don't do those cases. Now, if they genuinely mean, in a town like mine, certain kinds of cases in eye emergencies only go to the university. If somebody threw an axe through your eye, the average ophthalmologist doesn't know how to treat that anymore. We can all agree with this. It ought to go to a place where they actually do crazy crap like that. That's called the university. But if it's a standard kind of eye problem that they can handle, They should not be dumping cases. You ought to know about this in advance, and do not be complicit in violating the law. You will become involved by being complicit. I promise you. I'm not going to go through all the HIPAA sorts of things, but just understand this. This has to do with federal law relating to the maintenance and transfer of patient information. Patients are protected. The joke is the rest of the society has been more liberal about releasing things. You can find out things anywhere. You're in Las Vegas. You realize you're never off camera here? When you're in the elevator at 2 o'clock in the morning, drunk and having sex, it's all recorded. They sit around on weekends looking at the films. I promise you that. They can identify your face when you walk in the door. They have people who wander over at the table and say, you know, we'd like to buy you a drink, and then see you disappear. The card counters and things like that. This is the place where everybody knows everybody's business. And assuming you don't want to find yourself in a deep hole in the desert, you follow their suggestions. It's a very good thing to do. So let's understand that the feds have an obligation to you, and we don't even know where we are on this yet, because 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, when I started out, there were no computers running around keeping all kinds of data. There were none. It was paper records. They got transferred, that sort of thing. Casual use of the computer, just understand, I've had to go to testify on cases. I did one in California. I might as well tell you about this case because it's worth it. A guy had come in who had a light bulb up his ass, and he didn't just sit on the light bulb, because I've never seen that, by the way. It was an interesting foreign body. So they take a picture, and so they've got a 100-watt light bulb up this guy's ass. And, of course, what did the nurse do? She took a picture of it. She sent it to her 500 BFFs. Just so happened that guy's wife found out about it. Now, was he entitled to privacy when he entered that hospital? Yes or no? Yes. This is and by the way, his wife, this came from Homosexual Fun. His wife found out about it. Now she divorces him. He's worth $50 million. He's lost half of his fortune. They went ahead, and there was a big case about this, about what was recoverable. And again, California leads the way in a lot of things. And this case went down. The hospital paid out $25 million. And it had to do with release of restricted information. Don't be doing that crap. Don't take things home with you. Don't put it on the phone. Don't say, that's the greatest X-ray I've ever seen, and send it to people. That's what HIPAA is all about, is protection of information. And by the way, the records are confidential, and you ought to have a system of handling every record when you're done with it. Where does it go? Are they shredded? Are they this, they that? Whatever it is, it better be a system that works. I'm going to move on for just a second here. Social media, avoid it. Hospitals are now combing to see their employees what they've written. I'm dealing with a case right now which has to do with an emergency nurse and doctor talking on social media about the head nurse, How come she thinks they killed a patient, blah, blah, blah. You know what? Hospitals have no interest in that, and the people who do have an interest will get a hold of it. I go to depositions now, and they ask, have you ever written anything about this case or this patient on the internet? Have you ever sent it to this one or that one? And of course, they'll search. It's always good to remember when Bill Gates was in trouble about 10 years ago? Bill Gates is a smart guy, and he basically invented most of the current computer stuff. Bill couldn't get rid of emails that were damaging to him. If Bill Gates can't get rid of those emails, you're not smart enough to do it either, I promise you. And once they have them, if it refers to a specific patient, that can be used as evidence in court. So let's just all hold up our hands and take a pledge. Okay, we're not going to stick any of that crap there. Because once they get it, they'll go back and they'll look at everything. You do not want social media to be what brings you down in a court action. What are Good Samaritan actions? Those are things that you do because you're not required to, but you do them because they're the right thing. Since the Michigan Good Samaritan Act was originally passed in 1837, no physician, nurse, and I've never run it for PAs, has ever been charged with stopping at an emergency situation. You know, the side of the road, all these sorts of things, something blows up. People always say, well, I could get sued. Well, shit, you can get sued for anything, so do what's right. And the public understands that. They ain't going after you. You know, it's nickel-dime money anyway. And they want people to stop. If you're in the state of Vermont, the law says you have to stop if you're a healthcare professional. That's how much they believe in it. But here are the rules. It has to be no planned, this can't be somebody that you're seeing for their medical problem. It has to be no established doctor-patient relationship in advance, and you can't charge for it, because any service you can charge for, and it doesn't have to be a doctor, it could be a plumber, it could be anybody else who's licensed by the state. If you charge for it, you do it right, and you're going to be held responsible. So, no charging, not somebody you know, not somebody you got a relationship with, and just go ahead and give the care. I've given care now 13 times on planes in my career. 13 times. I once was flying out of New York, and they call, is there a doctor on board? So I went up to first class, and there's a guy there who I checked, and we were about probably 2 hours over the Atlantic. I said, yeah, he's dead. You know, what exactly they wanted me to do, the pilot said, well, should we go back? I said, look, there's 285 people on this plane. We want to go to London. And I've checked with this guy. He doesn't care. Of course, the lady sitting next to him says, well, I don't want to sit next to a dead man. I said, I'll sit next to him. And I said, is that his lunch? And the attendant says, yeah. I said, I'll eat it. So I sat next to him for the rest of the trip. He was very polite. And I like the guy, okay? We're tight. So, but don't be afraid. And, you know, I've had drunk 20-year-olds flying out of Australia who I had to start IV lines on, all that sort of thing. And you know what? You never get any trouble for that crap. So that's a myth. That's a standard myth. You're not going to be sued for any of that stuff. By the way, most of you have an insurance policy. Now, the bigger and more complex the institution, the more you think everything's covered. No, it isn't. You ought to get a copy of your insurance policy. It ought to be one of your important pieces of paper. You know, I can tell you in 5 minutes by looking at the declaration page of the policy whether some of it goes with you and some of it does not. So now you're doing something different in 5 years at a different location. What's covered and what isn't? You need to look at those things. You're in charge of you, and business is not simple. Ask the right set of questions. And you need to know how you can get sucked into problems on your own insurance policy. All right, I've got a little conclusion for you here, and it's real simple. You can't avoid playing this game. You are in the public sphere. You offer yourself. If you offer yourself, you're held to the standard of what you're licensed for in the state. Being sued is part of the business, but be smart. Know what's happening. Know who's responsible. And it is a huge mistake not to think that this isn't going to be severe penalties and real money if this continues on. Let me move on for just a second. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll be back in about an hour with the second half of this talk. But as I point out to you, you will never avoid being involved with the system, so understand it, take it seriously. Thank you very much.